Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 27th of April 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And, well, good news is it's sunny in Glasgow, apparently, but very cold. It's sunny, sort of rainy down here in Plymouth, but also very cold, and cold in Shropshire. So that's the weather reports that we've got today. But who's worried about the weather? Because the nation state is at stake, I think, Mike.
Indeed. Well, we'll start off with electronics and data and so on, and well, perhaps voter fraud. So BBC, hate to start off with the BBC, but there you go. Trade union bill. This is the trade union bill going through Parliament at the moment, and there have been some amendments to that, and one of them is the another look at e-voting. So it looks like we're going to try to introduce electronic voting through trade unions and their votes on whether to strike or not. So this is one of the amendments made by the House of Lords when it defeated the government last month on this issue. So we will see what happens, whether trade unions end up introducing electronic voting to this country, which is something we don't have at the moment.
But it's what you need if you're going to carry out proper vote rigging, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because the public obviously have no idea what's going on in the system. How do you put in checks and balances? So to me, this is the perfect way to complete the vote rigging system. And of course, people at the moment are warning about the EU referendum, that it's being set up in a way, the delay of the count of votes moving up the system.
The corporatisation of the vote.
And the corporatisation.
Indeed.
So if you want to be able to vote rig properly, it seems to me, get in the electronic system.
Indeed. The Express here pointing out so-called fury, as apparently David Cameron's pro-EU campaign is busy communicating via WhatsApp instead of using government IT systems. This sort of reflects what a certain Hillary Clinton was up to when she set up her own email server while she was Secretary of State, and of course WhatsApp not subject to the Freedom of Information Act, and therefore any communication that goes on there, it isn't possible to find out what it is. And also WhatsApp has just announced recently that they have implemented end-to-end encryption, so it does smack of hypocrisy perhaps that David Cameron has and his group have chosen to use WhatsApp for organising their campaign.
Well, wasn't this a security threat for all the rest of the country? If you were using encrypted communications, you were potentially a member of ISIS.
It absolutely is, but of course David Cameron isn't a criminal, Brian, so we can be rest assured that there's not going to be any criminality in what he's doing.
Are you sure about that?
No. Which brings me on to this lady. We mentioned her last week, Baroness Neville Rolfe. She's the business minister, and she was speaking to the Tech UK conference yesterday. And what she said was that earlier this month, the European Council and Parliament formally adopted the EU Data Protection Regulation and the Law Enforcement Directive with a formal signing today. We're looking forward to work with the Tech UK conference attendees to implement the regulation in the most advantageous way for the UK. I'm not clear who she has in mind when she says that.
UK PLC, I would guess, Mike.
Well, our United Kingdom, I think, is what she's talking about. So she asked about the data market and what the data market needs. And she said that to be fair, competitive and successful, there are three ingredients any market needs, which government can help to provide. The first one is knowledgeable and confident consumers who believe that the market will protect their best interests and benefit them personally. This brings people to the market. And what she said was that knowledgeable and confident consumers are the lifeblood of any business. Consumer confidence is easily knocked by breaches or complexity. Nearly 2/3 of the public consider that they have lost control over how their data is collected and processed. People need to understand how sharing their data benefits them directly, and to be given the tools to control how they who they share their data with and how and for what purpose it will be used. And the government is looking at awareness raising to help people understand how they give consent when sharing their data. and ensure that they understand the implications. So what she is talking about, if we're going to be blunt about it, she's talking about the use of people's data as a commodity, the use of people as a commodity, and how the government is going to help persuade people that it's safe to be a commodity. We're being farmed.
We're being farmed. On that subject, we should remember, of course, that the Behavioural Insight team started its work to use applied psychology inside DEFRA, if we want to talk about farming. And this leads in very nicely to what's been happening over many years, of course, which is the government building an electronic system, a network to link together businesses. This is what the Business Link system was about, so that nobody can have any form of commercial operation as a sole trader or as a small family business without the government knowing all of your business and all of your information. So this fits perfectly, I think. Well, David Cameron, as far as we're concerned, it's treason, and we've been warning about the creation of the EU military, and our warnings are now coming to fruition. So the Express here reporting that an EU army will happen, and it will weaken British defences. Now, it's been a retired colonel, Colonel Kemp, who's come out with this. Very senior man, and of course what he's really talking about is not just an EU army, this is the full EU military operation. And we can now tell our viewers that senior military officers are reporting, retired military officers I should say, are reporting that the whole of the structure is now in place. And if David Cameron chose to activate the EU military command and control structure throughout UK, that would be activated within 24 hours. And we would no longer be operating as a discrete nation state. We would no longer be operating within the NATO command and control structure. We would be fully integrated into a European military command and control structure. We can also tell our viewers and listeners that we have it on good authority that the former RAF base at RAF St Morgan in Cornwall has now been established as the EU military headquarters in UK. The inset there is a photograph of part of the base, no longer operating as a base for mainstream aircraft for the RAF. But French military personnel have been operating there for some considerable time, and we now know that this is the centre of the EU military command and control structure. So all of this set up, total lies and deceit by British Prime Minister David Cameron, as this EU military structure has been embedded in the UK with no debate in Westminster and no public announcement. And of course, Mike, the thing that makes this particularly serious is that all that is needed is some sort of crisis within UK. And we've now got a considerable number, thousands of French troops, complete with heavy equipment, on British soil. So it's quite remarkable.
That might be an ISIS crisis, perhaps?
That would be ideal.
An
yes.
ISIS crisis? Well, this is apparently what's going to happen, because according to this US intelligence chief, James Clapper, he was asked if clandestine ISIS cells, such as those in Brussels, exist in England. And he said, yes, they do. That is a concern of obviously ours and our European allies. And he said, we continue to see evidence of plotting on the part of ISIL, or ISIS, or Daesh, or whatever they're called this week, in the countries you name. Well, of course, David Cameron is helping create this perpetual enemy that we're going to face, because he has just given £2 billion, or he has arranged for £2 billion to go to the EU to help Turkey, Serbia and Albania join the European Union.
So on one hand, we've got people saying, well, the problem is the open border policy simply allows terrorists, if we believe in these terrorists, to move freely. He cooks up another $2 billion to help the process.
Exactly. So push the borders out to Turkey. Can we rely on Turkey, Serbia and Albania to actually manage their borders to manage the border with Europe, including Britain? I don't think so. That's pretty much the height of it. We've created this permanent enemy. We may see exactly this, whatever thing may happen, which might cause the European army to be announced. But we've also got to remember, of course, that Jean-Claude Juncker said on numerous occasions over the last 18 months that the formation of the EU army was absolutely a condition of Britain's renegotiation with Europe. This is something which isn't in the Best of Both Worlds document for some reason. I can't imagine why. And it's something that Cameron has lied through his teeth in denying every time he's been asked about it. But the fact is that Juncker said that this was a condition. Cameron's not admitting that it is, but we clearly have military people coming out and saying that's exactly what's going on.
Well, I think there's an element of panic breaking out amongst the senior retired military community, because what many of them are waking up to discover is that procedures which they themselves helped put in place are now being used for a completely different purpose to the purpose they believed. But this has got to be extremely dangerous, that we've got foreign troops now on British soil embedded with a command and control structure. We've got this continual created terrorist threat. Cameron declares that there's been an ISIS attack in UK, and the next minute we've got Civil Contingencies Act in force, and we're effectively in a dictatorship, which is equivalent to the French dictatorship at the moment.
R. Lockwood in the chat box asking, is civil war coming? Well, not in the sense you mean. What we're looking at is the clash of civilizations.
Clash of civilizations, and being attacked by our own government is probably close to it. Now, as we often say, when we put the news together, it tends to go with a flow rather than being calculated. And it's very interesting, Mike, that you picked up on ISIS. I get an email come in over the last 24 hours from Global Citizen. And it was fascinating. I know the print's a bit small, but it says, "Brian, I will speak without a microphone. I've been speaking so loud and the world has not been listening." And this is about an Iraqi lady warning about the genocide carried out by ISIS. So if we actually look carefully on the email, the subject line is ISIS. But of course, what's been pushed across is a very emotive face of this lady, who I'm sure has suffered. But why is her face on screen? To engage the public attention through emotion and concern. So the subject is not concern for the individual, the subject is ISIS. So we decided to go looking at Global Citizen. Well, here they are, very big, very expensive website. And what does it say? It's a community of people like me, apparently, Mike, which is a bit worrying. People who want to learn about and take action on the world's biggest challenges and use their power to get other people involved too. We bring you stories and actions to make a difference. And so it goes on. It says that you can unlock your power, the turning point for the future of people and the planet. They're going to change the planet. And we can meet the team. It says that the Global Citizen platform was created by the Global Poverty Project, Ryan Gaul and Riot House in 2012. So this got more interesting as we looked at it, and so we'll show you some of the people involved. Hopefully this should animate on screen. Let's see what happens. Is it going to go? It is. So we've got all the big boys, UNICEF, Oxfam, a whole range of aid agencies that we're not sure who they are, but we've got DFID, so we've got the British government in there. UNICEF actually appearing twice there, End of Polio. Encourage people to go and look at these organisations and say, who are they? And it goes on. Envoy of Youth, USA for UNHCR, Take Part, Action 2015, She. Have you heard of all these, Mike?
There's so many NGOs and charities doing so much good work. You've got to wonder why the world is such a screwed up place, don't you?
Could it be because of all these charities
Absolutely.
and NGOs? Well, there's a Vaz in there, we notice. It finishes in just a few seconds. Restless Development. Well, there we are. That's a brief overview of people that they've got locked in, but it goes on because we've got a few more here. And now we're into the big names because we've got Google, YouTube, and we've got the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So this is not a small organisation, and yet it's popped up out of nowhere, and apparently it's going to be changing us and changing the world. So if we put the pieces together a little more simply, Global Citizen said it was locked into Global Poverty Project. Strangely, their website isn't yet up and running, but it features a lot of young people making a pyramid shape in the air. I'm not sure what that's about. And down here, we've got Riot House, clearly an important sort of thing to be changing the world. And these are the people. So this is the main man named Ryan Gaul, co-founder of Global Citizen and the Hope Campaign. And he's a partner for Conscious Commerce. Ties in nicely with your e-commerce opening there. And he's a specialist, apparently, in igniting change.
Good.
Yep. Well, he's teamed up with this gentleman, Brian Ferrano. He's basically a specialist in the pop industry and social media marketing, ideal for changing the world. And then we've got the lady, Babs Birchfield, co-founder of Conscious Commerce, and she's a mixed media artist. So she's linked into the Riot House, and that brings us back to Global Citizens. So we're led to believe that the three people in the picture are driving the show. I actually believe it's more likely to be the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Google, and the power of YouTube.
Indeed.
So where does that bit take us? Well, we thought just remember who is pushing global citizenship, and we can come in a number of different angles. We've got the NGO organisations, global citizenship. We've got George Soros and open democracy. And notice that that is talking about transformation through linking people, particularly electronically. We've got our old friends Common Purpose. The inset there is that they're improving Manchester and Bangalore, I think.
Yes, they absolutely
Very
are,
similar cities, so well done, Common Purpose. I'm sure. I'm not sure what they're going to do about the weather, how they're going to standardise that. But there we go. And if you look at Global Citizen on Common Purpose's website, you'll find page after page after page. And don't just think it's Mr. Soros, because there are many other very obscure funders. Do go and have a look at the David and Elaine Potter Foundation. Not sure if they're any relation to Harry Potter, of course.
Of course, in Syria, NGOs, including Soros, absolutely at work. So this was Sputnik from, I think, November last year, covering Vanessa Beeley's coverage of the White Helmets. It's obviously linked to Soros, but I just want to mention that immediately after this program, we're going to play out the interview that I did with her at about that time with the about the White Helmets. So stay tuned after this program for that.
It's becoming easier and easier to dig this stuff out now, Mike. It's definitely coming up to the surface. It's not difficult to research who's driving the real international political agenda.
No, and that's right. But the scale of it is huge. Which brings us on to this. This is a major new article on the UK Column website. The Global Parliament of Mayors and the Abolition of the Electorate. I'm going to ask everybody that's watching that to read this and spread this as widely as you can. Now, just to give an impression of it, it begins by saying the overall objective of the internationalists is the undermining of the independent, self-governing Westphalian nation and its system of governance, replaced by a new order more favourable to them. And we're talking about recent pressures to introduce elected mayors. It says in 2004, the Bristol Common Purpose Group discussed advertising in the Evening Post for an elected mayor and see who applied. In the end, George Ferguson became the first independent mayor to lead a major city in Britain. He was officially sworn in at a ceremony held at Brunel's passenger shed, Temple Meads, on the 19th of November 2012. Well, Mr. Ferguson is up for re-election at the moment, and it's interesting, they had the hustings for this yesterday. He was talking about leadership because he's clearly a common purpose leader. One of his opponents for the election for mayor asked him, or made the point to him, you seem to mistake leadership with rulership. And that really sums it up. Of course, this is all part and parcel of the devolution revolution, as George Osborne likes to call it. And in October 2015, when he was talking about this, he said, "It's time to face the facts. The way this country is run is broken. People feel remote from decisions that affect them. Our cities are held back, and there's no incentive to promote local enterprise. It's time we fixed it. This new way of governing our country requires handing power to the people. Let the devolution revolution begin." Now, of course, this is big society on steroids, and we'll come on to that a bit more in a second.
And the truth on its head, Mike, isn't it? Because the devolution of power is, in fact, the state power creeping down to the lowest possible level.
Absolutely. And the other point is, if the way this country is run is broken, it's because George Osborne, David Cameron, Tony Blair, and all their ilk have broken it. So absolutely intentionally brought us to this point. Then, of course, in March this year, during his budget speech, Osborne said, "For the first time, we've reached agreement to establish new elected mayors in our English counties and southern cities too. We agreed a single powerful East Anglia combined authority headed up by an elected mayor and almost £1 billion of new investment. We've also agreed a new West of England mayoral authority, and they too will see almost £1 billion invested locally. And the authorities of Greater Lincolnshire will have new powers, new funding, and a new mayor." I just wanted to highlight this because this is the Mayor of The Hague, and he is in charge of the new Global Parliament of Mayors. And he's saying the Global Parliament of Mayors will deploy collective urban political power manifesting the right of cities to govern themselves, as well as the responsibility to enact viable cross-border solutions to global challenges. In this era of interdependence, where nation states are increasingly dysfunctional and cities are everywhere rising, the moment has come for cities to take the leap from effective local government to true global governance. To true global governance, that's what we're looking at here, global governance. So this is the project for a global parliament of mayors. What is the Parliament of Mayors movement? Well, they're talking about a planet ruled by cities representatives. A planet ruled by cities represents a new paradigm of global governance, of democratic globalism rather than top-down imposition, of horizontalism rather than hierarchy, of pragmatic interdependence rather than outworn ideologies of national independence. The foundations for this new world are being erected in our own age as cities collaborate and citizens communicate across borders and with increasing ease and frequency. What remains is to sense the liberating possibilities of these developments. Well, liberating for whom? And this was postulated in this book here that's on the screen there, If Mayors Rule the World, Dysfunctional Nations, Rising Cities. And that's by a guy called Benjamin Barber. And Barber, of course, is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. What does the Global Parliament of Mayors say about its role? Well, there's a number of questions on this website. For example, question, in a world of nation states and supranational entities like the EU, will cities have the resources and jurisdictional authority to undertake the difficult work of global governance? And the answer is one of the most important aims of the Global Parliament of Mayors is to develop a right of the city platform to secure the resources and jurisdictional autonomy necessary to discharging local and global responsibilities. Well, we've got to see who's driving this, because it's the like of Obama and Cameron, Common Purpose, these types of people that are driving this forward. That is pretty much a done deal. The next question is, can a Global Parliament of Mayors really be a world government with a command and control architecture? And the answer is no, it cannot and should not aspire to be that. It should be a bottom-up, soft governance institution that works through influencing other levels of governance and the civic and private sector with sound policies and effective solutions. Global public opinion must also be its target. So in other words, this is the big society on a global level. What we're talking about here is not a bottom-up control. This is control from the top to the lowest level. So it is absolute dictatorship. Just to remind you, this is the article. Please distribute it far and wide. I just want to mention a couple of points from the conclusion, because at the end of this, What we're looking at, of course, is this £3 billion refurbishment of the Houses of Parliament, which are due to begin. And of course, the British government, the British Parliament is going to be thrown out of that building while that work goes on. And we're asking the question, if we have given away so much of our independent right to govern ourselves to the EU, and if we're about to give away the rest of it to these city mayors and to these city states and city regions, this basically is the abolition of the nation.
It's being put in place, or it's being conducted increasingly rapidly, Mike, and it's just becoming so easy to see society degenerating into chaos and turbulence, which of course is to take people's eye off what's being done in the dark. But we're now starting to see these milestones come out. So quite a few people commenting in our chat room at the moment and saying what we've got here is a dictatorship by a new set of lords, in inverted commas.
Yeah,
and I think
feudalist.
This is feudalist system. And then you say, what is the actual belief behind those lords? Well, I think we're about to have a little look at that.
Well, just before we do, I wanted to ask if anybody has any clue about because this image here is the Global Parliament of Mayors, and the three X's I found quite interesting behind the main panel there. So if anybody has any suggestions about what that represents, I'd be very interested.
Yeah. Excellent article. Do read it, and we hope that you'll help us to spread it far and wide. Well, while that is happening and rapidly becoming a reality, of course, what are the general public being fed? And the answer to that is bread and circuses. This was a very interesting little story that was pushed through to us. It got more and more interesting the more we had a look at it. So it was the Mail, and from embracing their passion to asking questions, 5 easy ways you can teach your child to play with purpose. So it's a very interesting little headline. It says that childcare director Rod Soper says play is the most important part of a child's life, and he advocates playing with purpose to help the children develop. And the educator gives Female his top 5 tips to teach children to play better. So it's a pretty hard-hitting headline. Let's have a look at Mr. Soper. Well, here he is. Certainly scrubbed up, isn't he? Lovely hairstyle. Director of Education. And what this article is really doing is just providing an advert for his organisation, Thinkers Inc. And what are these 5 key tips for playing with children? Well, here they are. You've got to ask questions, laugh with your child, teach them not to be helpless, embrace their passion, and celebrate play. So this is a major Daily Mail article, and that is what it's teaching parents. Well, what it's really teaching is the transformation agenda, and it's very easy to see why, because if you go to look at Thinkers Inc., you're going to find a very weird website, which is apparently to do with teaching children, but is it? So we'll leave you to have a look at that in more depth, but a lot of very strange newspeak language, philosophy. Children have got to be taken forward, they've got to learn how to play, and our experts and international experts are going to not only help those children, but to help the Thinkers Inc. staff to train the children. So what sort of journalist would produce this story? Well, here she is, Lauren Ingram, and she's based in Australia, and this has come through Mail in Australia. What does she say about herself? Well, she's a feminist, she's a politics nerd, she likes gin, and she apparently eats a lot of sticky buns. She's a carb eater. And she says, I'll be your best kept secret and biggest mistake. So that's reassuring, isn't it? This is obviously somebody of quite some intellectual prowess who's advising us on how to look after our children. Well, what does she think about herself? She's very impressed with her new hairstyle. She can't really get over it. Do you think it makes it look better, Mike? I think I prefer the purple. But if that's not enough, she got upset because she'd cut her finger. Ow. And a little bit of soft porn if you need it. So this is her raving about a particularly smutty section in Summer Skin. And presumably this is another indication that this is a lady we should have advising us on how to bring up our children. But it turned a little bit darker because she's not ashamed about her abortion. And she's been shouting out that she thinks that this is fine. Maybe it is for her. And she hasn't regretted it for a second. So this is very nice stuff. But remember how we've started the news. And now remember the bread and circuses that the Mail is putting in front of people by apparently giving them 5 points to bring up their children. Well, on the subject of abortion, there's some very interesting things starting to unfold. The Telegraph here is now talking about abortion wars, particularly in America, where anger is growing on America's new front line over a woman's right to choose. And if you read this article, effectively anybody who criticizes abortion is a religious extremist. And they quote Dr. Bernard Rosenfeld, a 71-year-old doctor who runs a Houston abortion clinic. And he's been calling the anti-abortion protesters religious extremists who are trying to force their religion on other people, pandering to politicians. And he's not a very happy man because new rules, particularly on safety in these organisations, means they're getting expensive and some of them are shutting down. Well, do they need shutting down? This might help us make up the decision because it's LifeSite reporting on the increasing number of nurses and other medical people who are talking about aborted children being born alive and then simply being murdered. And according to this article from a student nurse in France, when a baby boy was born alive, he had a needle stuck into his heart in order to kill him. And of course, he was stopped from crying out because that would be distressing to mother. So I would encourage you to go and read these articles. We've been learning about this over many months. It's now coming to the surface, but it gets worse. This is the same LifeSite, and it's reporting what other media sources are reporting, that Satanists are now mocking babies in their protest against anybody saying abortion shouldn't be happening. They want abortions because, of course, the death of babies is important for Satanists. And here is Street Theatre by Satanists. This is that come out of the Satanic Temple, and they've got people on the streets, grown men dressed as babies, to expose fetal idolatry and the perpetuation of fictional coercive propaganda against reproductive health organisation. So they're pro the death of babies and woe betide anybody who is pro-life. And the Satanic Temple said that it believed that the anti-choice movement's obsession with and mischaracterization of the fetus obscures medical reality and a woman's constitutional right to choice. So this is where we are headed, I think, with the, if you want to know what is the mentality of the lords who are going to run these city-states, they are going to be pro-abortion people. Pretty despicable stuff, and we're now seeing it openly spill out onto the streets.
Okay. This is a fascinating little story. So the Sunday Post, this is in Scotland, publishes an article about faulty NHS equipment. And it's a quite reasonably measured article. It's talking about, they say that they revealed that people were dying in Britain last year linked to malfunctioning medical equipment. And they gave some statistics. And they said that people were dying due to faulty beds, defibrillators, dialysis machines, faulty mattresses, and as a result of a range of faults in a range of different medical implants. Well, apparently the government didn't like it. So the MHRA, which is the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, one of the NHS regulators, wrote a response. As a result of this response, apparently the Sunday Post has taken this article down. Now, this seems to be, from what I understand, this is their policy, that they will take an article down until they get a chance to review the article and make a response to the the complaint that they've received. So the MHRA said, "Sir, your article, Deadly Toll of Dodgy NHS Gear, Thousands Killed or Seriously Injured by Faulty Equipment, is not only misleading, but could lead to an increase of concern, not just amongst healthcare professionals, but also amongst patients." And then they go on to describe that there is a yellow card system which allows practitioners within the NHS to report on faulty medical devices and medical equipment. It finishes off by saying, "We are working together to improve the overall management of medical device incidents in health services in the UK. This is through the appointment of medical device safety officers with specific roles designed to support improved patient safety." So what's incredible about this response is that it basically doesn't address the basic tenet of the report, which is that people are dying or being severely injured by faulty medical equipment in hospitals. And the point that the Sunday Post was making was that this isn't anything new. This has been reported before. This report called Biomedical Engineering Affecting UK Healthcare, Advancing UK Healthcare. This highlighted, this is from the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. It highlighted this in 2014, and the Sunday Post report quotes from this article, and this article was covered by the Daily Mail and a whole bunch of other mainstream outlets in 2014, and they don't seem to have had this response from the NHS regulator. So I do wonder what has changed. Are they feeling a little sensitive about this?
I think they're probably feeling very sensitive, Mike, because of course people increasingly looking at the NHS. We've got all the doctors' protests going on at the moment. We've got all of the deaths that have occurred in Staffordshire and elsewhere. And we've now got senior NHS professionals who are coming forward to talk about the unnecessary deaths in the NHS. Of course, if it blew too quickly, Cameron's privatisation project would be scuttled, wouldn't it? So I think this is a fear factor that they've had to come out with this response. Well, that brings us to the end of today's news. Thank you very much for joining us. Some very serious topics. We think there's a need to get the lid off and to expose what is really going on. And we hope that all our viewers and listeners will help us push the topics and the news and the detail around as many other outlets as you possibly can. And of course, if you can put those UK columns pens to good use and get the letters in asking the questions directly from the individuals, please do. Are we close to a dictatorship? It would appear from events of the European military structure now established in Britain that we are. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.